Now then, how are you doing? I hope you're well. You know, I'm always trying to encourage students to keep things simple. No matter how complex a scene is, one of the best ways to approach it, in my opinion, is always to reduce it down to its barest essentials. Let the details come later. To illustrate this, I'd like to go back to basics and show how a landscape painting with atmosphere and impact can be produced with just a few simple washes and only 4 colours. These are the beautiful Narvik Fjords in Norway. I've chosen this view because of its simplicity. A warm evening sky sets the quiet reflective mood, while the changing tones of the hills help to differentiate their varying distance away from us. All of these elements can be created in watercolour using a series of basic washes. The first wash I'm going to create is a wet in wet wash. In watercolour we're either applying paint to a dry surface or to a damp or wet surface. The two different circumstances create very different results. In a wet in wet wash, the colours are encouraged to bleed together on the surface of the paper. So, having wet my paper with clean water, I'm applying some cadmium yellow. My board is set at a slight angle, which gives me a little bit of control over where and how the paint is going to flow. Working quickly, because I don't want my paper to dry out before I've finished, I'm going to mix up some cadmium red and add it to the wash. Notice how I'm working it downwards from the top of the paper into the yellow. Care must be taken not to obliterate the yellow, and if the colours don't fuse together how I want them to, well, then I always have the ultimate sanction of being able to lift the board up and tilting it. Well, finally, I'm going to mix up some French ultramarine and add it to the wash. Again, it's important not to let the blue take over. One of the aims of a wash like this is to try and achieve a good, healthy balance between the 3 colours. If one colour turns out too bright, for instance, then it can upset the whole wash. Okay, so this isn't looking too bad. It needs to be left for a few minutes though. A wet in wet wash will carry on working right up until the very last nanosecond. My wet in wet wash has dried, so now I'm going to start painting in the hills. For this, I'm using French ultramarine. Notice how, as I lay down the hill shapes, you can still see the initial wet in wet wash showing through. This is important. Watercolour is a transparent medium, a property we should seek to exploit as often as possible. This is a transparent wash. The clue is in the name. It's worth remembering that all the light within our painting comes from the white of the paper, nowhere else. Think of it as a backlight. If we apply our paint too thickly, then we'll be stopping that light from getting through, and our paintings will soon turn dull and the colours will go muddy. Once the mountain wash has dried, I've applied a second wash. It's worth noting that the hills look darker, not because I've altered the mix in any way. It's actually the same mix. The reason it looks darker is because I've painted it over itself, effectively doubling up in its intensity. In watercolour, we work from light to dark. Overlaying washes in this way is an efficient method of building up a painting. Each previous wash contributes towards all the washes that follow it, maintaining an overall harmony and recycling colours wherever possible. I'm now going to mix some burnt umber with French ultramarine together in the palette to create a much darker, slightly earthier colour. I'm going to use this for my final layer of hills. The distant hills, those that I applied with the first transparent wash, look like they're further away from us than the darker, richer hills in the foreground, creating the illusion of depth and space on a two-dimensional surface is one of the hardest things we have to do in watercolour. Using tone and colour to create that illusion is what we call aerial perspective. This whole scene has been built up using a wet in wet wash for the sky and a series of 5 transparent washes overlaid on top of each other, only adding burnt umber to increase the darkness on the final 2 washes. I'm reusing the cadmium yellow, cadmium red and French ultramarine in the water, just to balance things up a bit with the sky. In an ideal world, we'd be able to hit the exact intensity of colour and tone that we need first time, every time. But things don't always work out how we plan them. Building things up gradually places the control in our hands. If in doubt, keep it light and don't be in too much of a hurry to get to the dark tones. Most important of all, keep it simple.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that and found it helpful. You know, it's a good idea to go back to basics every now and then, just to rediscover the magic of the medium. I love watercolour, me. Until next time, take care.